All right, great. So welcome to meeting number 4 of our AI task force. Just a couple of housekeeping items as we get started. The task force members and technical advisors should be showing up as panelists in the Zoom window. If you aren't, just get in touch with Scott Kleiman or Dan Matz, and they'll promote you. So it's an easy promotion. This meeting, as you just heard, is being recorded. You can access the other recordings of the prior meetings via the AI Task Force website. Now, to get there, you're going to go to GoPIF's website, the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. Scan across the top, and you will see top initiatives, and just click on the AI Task Force, and you'll be there. Finally, I want to welcome our newest member, Mike Duguay. He's the newly confirmed Commissioner of Economic and Community Development. He'll be filling the seat left open by Heather Johnson as she's transitioned from DECD. So Mike, welcome to the group. As for today, we're going to embark on our second meeting to cover a major AI theme. This time we're going to be talking about workforce. First on our agenda is Mike McKerney. He's the director of MDOL's Center for Workforce Research and Innovation. He's also a technical advisor to the task force. Mark will lead us through a presentation on how Maine's labor market may be exposed to emerging AI technologies. And I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation. We've reserved about 30 minutes for Mark, which will also include some time for questions at the end of his presentation. The second part of our agenda is a short panel featuring Sandra Klossmeyer from Bangor Savings Bank and Tiffany Shea from the nonprofit National Workforce Group, Jobs for the Future. Chris Mallett from the Rue Institute will be leading us through that discussion, where we'll hear about a local case, and basically a case study about how the bank is focused on upskilling its workforce on AI skills. And then we'll hear from Tiffany about how the workforce systems across the country are responding to AI. We then have a good deal of time for discussion to both reflect on these presentations and also to affirm that we have the right questions for our workforce subgroup and the information or the approach they'll be taking. Before we start that, I want to wrap up my quick remarks with some other task force business. So the small groups have all been assigned. I want to thank everybody for your responsiveness and signing up to a small group task force. These groups have been named. You see them up on your screen, but you don't have to panic. The group leader will be getting in touch with you shortly. As a next step for the task force members can expect to hear directly from their subgroup leaders, as I mentioned, in the coming weeks, with invitations to begin scheduling those 2 to 3 meetings that we'll have in each of the subgroup categories over the next couple months. With regard to infrastructure topics, when we reviewed the roadmap last month, the task force identified questions about the AI implications for the Maine energy and broadband infrastructure. Those are important areas that were not naturally covered through the small groups. In response, the Governor's Energy Office and the Maine Connectivity Authority have both volunteered to produce some research for the task force on AI's implications for the respective domains. And that information will be shared back with us, and we'll hear more about that over the summer. So thanks to both Dan and Andrew for their input there. Finally, we've previously noted that we have some interest in getting public input or some kind of responsiveness in general. The GoPIF team has worked with Mary and I to develop a public feedback form, which will be posted in coming weeks. This should be a helpful link to direct anyone who asks, so that we have the opportunity basically to direct anyone who asks, how do they give input to this form, and then they contribute their ideas, and we can let them know when it's up and when they're ready to go. So hopefully that wasn't too discombobulated, but I'm going to turn the conversation now over to Mark so that we hear more about the sort of the overview of the implications for Maine's workforce. Mark?
Thanks so much, President Dagler. I am just going to pull up the screen share on my end. And maybe folks can just, somebody can let me know if the slides are showing. Looks good. Thanks, Dan. So thanks so much for having me today. My name is Mark McNerney, Director of the Center for Workforce Research and Information. And what I put together here is a little bit of an overview of some of the existing literature that has assessed the potential impact that AI might have on the workforce in the years ahead. And then kind of through the lens of that, some of the existing research in the economics literature that has been done, overlaying that with Maine's labor market information to get somewhat of a complete picture and a local picture about the studies so far and what that tells us about Maine's workforce specifically. And I'm going to frame this around two specific channels through which we could kind of think about AI having a potential impact on workforce. And one that could lead to some positive outcomes for workers that I'll refer to as a productivity enhancement channel. So we can imagine many types of workers or teams of workers that as they learn to use and integrate AI into their workflow, that can free up a lot of additional time, right? You can take certain tasks that AI can complete with a high degree of precision and quickly, and you can kind of work with AI to enable workers to complete certain types of work more quickly, maybe taking lower value tasks that they need to complete and asking AI to complete those so that those workers can shift their focus and spend more time on higher value added tasks. And that would, on average, we would expect to lead to productivity increases, an increase in demand for workers that are able to use the technology in that way. And that could lead to some great outcomes, such as rising compensation for workers using the technology in that way. And there's another channel that could lead to some adverse outcomes for workforce that I'll refer to specifically in terms of task displacement. So from this channel, we can think about certain tasks within the workforce that are highly labor intensive. And once AI becomes integrated into the workforce, some of those tasks might be automated by the use of an AI model. And that could displace tasks and potentially workers that are currently responsible for those tasks, reducing demand for workers in specific occupations. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the other literature on the subject. And what we'll see is that, in terms of the current landscape of research and scholarship on the subject, there is a wide variety of predictions from various economists about the potential impact of AI on jobs and the economy, including things like economic growth rates, the net job impact, and what effect AI might have on inequality within the labor markets. One thing that I think is becoming somewhat more clear when we contrast the potential of AI to past ways of automation is that it could be quite different compared to what we've experienced in the past. So specifically, when thinking about the most recent wave of automation that was largely impacting manual production tasks, it led to some displacement of workers, specifically middle-income workers, in jobs that usually didn't require a college degree for entry. And often that effect was highly concentrated in specific industries and geographic areas. You could think of an extreme example like a plant closure or a mill closure, where, of course, the displacement, the impact of that is highly concentrated within a geographic area and within a specific industry. Relative to that, AI's impact could be much more diffuse across industries, across jobs with various skill and education requirements. So in the first section here, I'm going to take a handful of studies, talk about a handful of studies, but one study in particular from several authors, mostly working at OpenAI, that have begun to document the potential impact of AI on the labor market by taking an approach that tests specific job tasks that AI has the ability to perform today and perform well, and then overlay that with occupational information, specifically a consideration of which occupations include responsibilities aligning with those tasks, And then what are the demographics, the geographic characteristics, and the typical educational profile of workers within those occupations? To highlight some of the key findings from this paper, the study found that about 19% of US jobs might see 50% or more of their job tasks being either automated or facilitated alongside with an AI tool. And that overall, there's about 15% of all job tasks in the US that could be completed significantly more quickly using AI tools with no impact on quality of work. Now I'm going to take the measure from that OpenAI paper specifically and overlay it with Maine's occupational employment and wage statistics. And just a little bit of background about the measure that we're looking at. It relies on the ONET database of tasks. Think about all the tasks that a worker might do in their work in terms of their day-to-day responsibilities. The authors set up kind of tests, an assessment of ChatGPT to determine which of these types of tasks can ChatGPT complete today. And they specifically measured tasks for which use of an AI tool like ChatGPT could help to complete that task, reduce the time that it took by at least 50% while maintaining a consistent quality of work. And then they're going to measure what share of all job tasks within each occupation would meet that definition. So within the next few slides, we're going to kind of look at a few different ways that that measure could be applied to Maine's labor statistics. So there's, as an initial look, this chart here, there's a lot going on, so we'll kind of go through the different component pieces of it. Along the horizontal axis here, we have jobs that are in 5 different groups. So those jobs are grouped together based on the share of job tasks within each job that AI has the potential to perform or facilitate that task. So jobs with the highest share have the most potential for adoption of AI or use of AI in the work, and jobs with the lowest share of, for example, less than 20%, have very little potential. Most of the tasks are unrelated or are tasks for which AI is not well suited to facilitate work. In the red, we have the average hourly wage among all workers, all Maine workers in that occupational group. And then on the left-hand side, the vertical axis, we have the share of all Maine jobs that are within that group. So let's start by looking at the kind of the extreme ends of this distribution. On the high end, we have about 11% of jobs within the state that have a high potential to use AI tools in the workplace. So we have about 11% of jobs within the state for which 60% or more of their job tasks could be impacted by AI. And on average, when we look at these jobs tend to be higher paying on average. The hourly pay within those two groups ranges from about $30 to $33 per hour. And there's a mix. Many do require some post-secondary education for entry, some don't. On the other end of the distribution, the jobs that have very little potential, there's about 62% of Maine jobs in occupations for which 40% or less of their job tasks might be impacted or could be facilitated by use of AI. And those tend to be lower paying jobs on average. The hourly pay within those two categories ranges from $21 to $22 per hour on average. And then we have another middle group, about 20% of jobs that have close to half of their tasks that could be impacted or facilitated by use of AI. And that's a somewhat higher paying group on average, about $36 per average within that group. And now we're going to use this framework and continue to look at Maine's occupational employment, but in a few different ways. One way that we could look at it is by looking at occupational groups. So in this chart, again, we're using the same measure. What share of job tasks within each occupation has the potential for the use of AI? That's on the vertical axis here. And now on the horizontal axis, we're counting up how many Maine jobs are there within that group. So again, let's look at the kind of the highest potential impact on the top right of this chart. The group that has the highest combination of both jobs and potential use of AI in the workplace is the Office and Administrative Support Group. The job category that has the highest AI impact, but has somewhat fewer jobs, is the Computer and Mathematical Group. So those two groups stand out certainly in terms of the potential impact of AI to use and facilitate work within jobs. We certainly see as well some groups that have very little potential to use AI, and those groups include more manual related work, including production, construction, maintenance, farming, food preparation, and a few other groups. Those groups have very little potential for the use of AI in the work, and we see some of those groups that have a pretty significant number of jobs as well. And we have another set of occupations somewhere in the middle: business and financial operations, management, educational instruction, and some of our more skilled technical healthcare occupations that have a combination of both a high number of jobs and a high potential in some occupations to use AI in the workplace. One other way to look at this is looking at the typical education that's required for entry into a job. So here again, we're using the same categories of the share of job tasks within each occupation that has the potential to use AI, but now we're grouping jobs together based on the typical educational path required to enter that career. So looking at the lowest impact, we see a large group of jobs that have both a low impact of AI potentially and don't typically require a post-secondary degree for entry. So a very large group of jobs that have low potential impact and currently have low educational requirements. As we look up further along the distribution, some of the jobs that have the highest potential impact are high-skilled jobs that require a bachelor's degree in some instance, a master's, doctoral, professional degree, or a 2-year degree. And then within the middle, that 40 to 60% category is somewhat split. Some jobs that require higher levels of education, a bachelor's degree or above, and another group that has a lower skill or lower education requirement. That middle category is somewhat evenly split between lower skill and somewhat lower paying occupations and higher skill, higher paying. And as we proceed, we're going to look at a few examples of specific occupations as we kind of continue to drill down at some occupations that fit within those categories. So bear with me as we will get to some concrete examples in just a minute. Another way to look at this measure is to look at the geographic variation. Of course, certain industries are located within certain regions of the state. So we might want to consider what portions of the state might have a relatively higher or a relatively lower impact. This map compares the average task share of jobs within a particular county that have the potential to be impacted by AI. We do see that there are some areas of the state, specifically southern Maine, coastal areas of the state, Cumberland County, Kennebec County, and Waldo County have the highest average AI potential score. But it's also striking that the overall variation between the highest average score and the lowest average score for each county is actually quite small. It only ranges from about 30 to 36%. And that kind of speaks to the earlier point that I made, that compared to past waves of automation that we saw a really concentrated impact affecting specific demographic groups or specific geographic areas, the potential to use this technology is really much more diffuse. It's spread out across many industries and therefore across many different areas of the state. So we do see some pockets of employment that might be more likely to be affected within the state, but as well, many of these occupations that we'll discuss are really important in many industries and therefore are employed in many different areas of the state. One other way to kind of consider the way that AI might potentially impact the workforce is to think about what skills are really essential across different occupations, and then looking at the relationship between the potential to use AI in the workplace, and what skills are most essential within those occupations in the workplace. So the next several slides are going to document that relationship using measures of skill from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. These skill measures are defined as something that is developed, general, applied, and work-related. In other words, skill is thought to be something that's typically acquired through education, training, or experience. It's applicable across different occupations. It's related to your performance in your job, and it's action-oriented. There are 17 such skill categories defined by the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we'll find that there are 4 categories that are strongly positively correlated with AI potential, 3 negatively correlated, and for the rest, the relationship is not quite as clear. But here are the skill categories that are related most closely with the potential to use AI in the workplace. Computer and IT skill, there is a really strong relationship. And this comes from, as we've heard from past meetings, the potential to use this tool in terms of code generation, troubleshooting code. There is a lot of potential, and these models are already extremely good at facilitating work in some of those areas. AI can really quickly find errors in code, and so that's a really strong positive relationship we see. Other areas include reading and writing, problem solving and decision making, and critical analysis and thinking. Next, we'll look at the skill categories, again, that have a strong negative relationship, right? So there's very little potential, at least today, to use these tools within certain types of occupations or work settings. The skill categories that are negatively related to this AI potential measure are mechanical skill, fine motor skill, physical strength, and stamina, and less of a clear relationship between the detail-oriented skill category. But right, again, this is kind of intuitive. These models are not yet well suited to augment or complement work in more labor, specifically physical labor-intensive types of workplaces. And then for the other categories that I examined, not as clear of a relationship, though some of a relationship with customer serving skills. And we can see already, I think, the way that these models have the potential to augment work related to customer service, but less of a clear relationship with some of the other skill categories, interpersonal skill, leadership, and science. So as I mentioned, I think it might be helpful in this context to look at some specific occupations. So what are the occupations? Here we're looking at a table of occupations that have a concentration of employment in Maine, so at least 500 jobs in Maine, ranked by the highest AI potential. And this, again, we can see the difference between the types of occupations that are expected to be impacted most. Some that are high skill occupations that require some post-secondary education, and many that involve computer and IT skill sets. So, for example, software developers, computer systems analysts, data scientists, right? Many of these occupations have high potential to adopt AI, and they're also, many of them are high-paying occupations. Another group that we talked about are more clerical or administrative in nature. So many of these jobs involve, processing information, organizing information. They tend to be somewhat lower paying jobs on average, and they do not typically require an advanced post-secondary degree. So some examples include, clerical, administrative assistant, office assistant types of roles. And to dig down even further, this is the kind of what's underneath the researcher at the most detailed level. The research tasks which work activities AI is well suited to perform. So here's one example of legal secretaries and administrative assistants, which are expected to have high potential AI impact. When we look at the work activities, what are the typical day-to-day responsibilities in this position? They include things like documenting and recording information, processing, and organizing, and planning. And many of these types of tasks, AI is already really well suited to perform. Demand within those occupations has actually been decreasing for many years. So if we look at occupational employment within Maine over the last 2 decades or so, it's long been the case that there has been decreasing demand for workers in office and administrative support occupations. So going back 2 decades, there has been a decrease of about 12,000 jobs within this occupational group over the last 2 decades, and they now comprise 12% of jobs throughout the state. It's likely that this task displacement mechanism could affect workers within this category and continue what we've seen, which is a downward trend in terms of demand for workers within this group. On the other extreme, let's look at some of the occupations that have the lowest potential to use AI and a high concentration of employment. So here we're looking at occupations that have at least 1,000 jobs with some of the lowest potential. In this case, 5% or less of their job tasks have the potential to be performed by AI. And these include occupations that involve physical work, such as food preparation, cleaning, maintenance, construction, production, transportation. Okay. As I mentioned as well in the preview, there's quite an emerging literature on the subject. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight quickly a few of the studies that to me really stand out as being impactful and shaping the way that I think about this technology and the potential to impact Maine's workforce. One really important consideration is how AI might affect inequality within the labor markets. So, for example, there has been a long literature that has documented that there has been a widening gap between earnings, specifically of workers that have higher levels of education, higher levels of skills, some kind of specialty that they can bring to the workforce, some kind of expertise. Those workers have been doing relatively well, and we have seen a widening gap between workers that have advanced post-secondary education and workers that don't have a college degree. We've seen an earnings gap between those groups that's been widening over time. And part of that is related to the past wave of automation that we described. Automation within factory floors, for example, that displaced workers over many years in middle income occupations. Part of that has resulted in a widening of the earnings gap. This paper here from David Otter points to the potential that AI could have the effect of actually reducing labor market inequality. And here's a little bit about the kind of intuition behind that finding. AI could potentially enable a larger set of workers to perform higher stakes tasks, to access large amounts of information quite quickly. There are some experimental studies that show that, for example, workers that are working with AI tools could become more productive in the areas of code generation, computer programming, writing, processing information. And that could have the potential of raising the productivity of somewhat lower skilled workers and closing the kind of productivity gap between high productivity workers and lower productivity workers. If the technology is integrated into the workforce in that way, that could have the impact of reducing inequality across different demographic groups of workers. Another dimension that we can kind of think about how AI might affect the economy and the workforce is the impact that AI might have on overall economic growth rates and productivity growth rates. There's a really wide range of different predictions in the economics literature. Some that are very optimistic that, for example, AI could lead to a doubling of economic growth rates, and we'll see all of these large productivity increases as a result. And some that have much more modest predictions. So I just wanted to highlight here a study from Daron Acemoglu that is really somewhat more pessimistic about the potential impact of AI, whereas some are predicting that it could lead to a doubling of economic growth rates. Acemoglu estimates that there will be a modest increase of only about 1 to 1.5% of additional economic growth over the course of 10 years. So there's a really wide range of predictions about, how quickly, how much it will affect growth rates, and whether it will actually have the effect of increasing or decreasing inequality. One final finding that I wanted to highlight here is that I think it's helpful to consider past waves of disruption and past waves of technological breakthrough and how they've impacted labor markets. We tend to think about these disruptions as happening much more quickly than they actually are, even though the technology innovation itself can occur at a breakthrough pace. It often takes many decades for that technology to become fully integrated and for us to see and view around us the impact that it has on the workforce. So one final study here that I wanted to highlight was from Deming, Ong, and Summers that showed how these past waves have played out. First, displacing many workers from the agricultural sector in the early industrial revolution period. The second, the automation of those production tasks that led to a long decrease over decades of production-related occupations. And then a newer wave that we've experienced in the last few decades of this shifting away from a workforce in office and administrative support occupations that we discussed. These disruptions do play out over multiple decades. And it's actually interesting that when we think about the recent experience, even though it feels like the changes that we're experiencing now are so rapid, the last 30 years within the data have actually been significantly less disruptive than those previous waves that I mentioned, displacement of workers from agriculture, and then the automation of blue-collar production work. So to wrap up, just trying to keep us on schedule, we talked about that there is a very wide variation in terms of predictions that folks make along many different areas that we might think about AI, the potential that it might impact growth, the effect that it might have on labor market inequality, the types of workers that it'll affect, and how quickly it's all going to play the pace of this technological breakthrough. But it is very likely that compared to past waves of automation, I think AI, the impact could be much more diffuse across workers of different demographic groups, educational profiles, and across a variety of industries. The jobs that are likely to be impacted are divided between those that have somewhat higher requirements for entry, higher educational requirements, as well as lower paying positions, including clerical or administrative positions, customer service related positions. And some of those positions we have already seen a longstanding decline in demand for workforce. So with that, I'm going to pause and see how much time we might have for questions, but I also want to try to keep us on schedule for today.
Well, Mark, let me thank you for an awesome presentation and make sure that any of the members have an opportunity to ask questions.
Sure, thanks.
No questions?
I had one question. Thank you for a great presentation. I agree. When they talk about task automation in the studies you cited, do you know if those tasks are weighted by how much time is actually spent on them, or is it just like you treat every task the same when you're analyzing an occupation?
Yes, I believe the tasks are weighted. There is a relative importance measure within the ONET database that is a representation of how much time that particular task takes, within a typical, day-to-day. So, if you only work on, budgeting and that represents 5% of your time, then it would have essentially a 5% weight for importance. So yes, I do believe that is considered within the literature and accounted for.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course.
Mark, excellent presentation, very helpful the way you put it all together. So thank you for that. You didn't really use the word call centers, but I think you talked about customer service. Sort of two questions. I know Commissioner Fortman could not be here, but have we seen yet job impacts at call centers that we would attribute to AI in any way? And could you maybe speak a little bit more about the number of jobs that may be impacted? I know you may not be able to project what kinds of decisions employers might make, but that seems like one of the fields of work that is changing, maybe looked a little more likely to be moving in this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say to this point, I am not aware of any specific large layoffs that have occurred within the state so far impacting call center workers. But certainly that is an area that, within the national news has certainly come up. I think at the moment, we have, as I mentioned, we haven't seen those types of large sudden announcements, but it's certainly within a group of workforce. I think within the those occupations specifically fell outside of when we looked at the top 15 occupations by jobs and potential impact. I believe that's an example of an occupation that's kind of just outside of that, but certainly does have a high potential to be affected by this technology. Absolutely.
There
Okay,
are
great.
additional questions in the chat, but you're sticking around until we have the broader Q&A, correct, Mark?
Absolutely.
Great. So maybe we can come back to those and use those to seed the broader Q&A. And I think there's some other questions that will come up through the discussion of our next panelists. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Mallett, who is going to run a really exciting panel on local and national case studies on AI and the future of work. So Chris, are you ready to take the helm?
Sure, Mary, thanks. Mark, just want to echo our colleagues. That was really fantastic. Thanks so much. So much to work with there. And hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be able to try and facilitate a conversation between really two phenomenal guests who've joined us. So I want to welcome Sandra Klossmeyer as the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Bangor Savings Bank, and Tiffany Shea, who leads innovation programs at Jobs for the Future. As Mary and President Degler suggested earlier, both are going to try to help us see what we've been talking about with respect to the workforce, AI and the future of work, through the lens of, in Sandra's case, a Maine-based example and leadership, and in Tiffany's case, some work that her organization and she and her colleagues have been leading with respect to understanding, frankly, some of the themes that Mark was just introducing around pace of adoption and the way this work is actually unfolding. And we'll get to some policy implications as well, Tiffany. So we're so pleased that you can all join us. I just want to start by asking each of you to tell us about yourselves and a little bit about your organizations, maybe starting with you, Sandra.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. So I, at Bangor Savings Bank, oversee our corporate strategy and development team, which means me and my team have oversight of our strategy management approach and managing our strategic plan, as well as managing and leading a portfolio of strategic projects, one of which I'm here to talk about today is called Accelerating Insights. So Bangor Savings Bank has been around for 170 years, and we have about 70 locations across Maine and New Hampshire and a lending office in Andover, Massachusetts. We're a mutually held community bank that is also very innovative and what I would consider long-term and future-oriented, with a variety of different business lines. And I think sometimes what makes it so fun to work here is the way that we think about different approaches. But I'll share more as we get into Accelerating Insights later.
Awesome, Sandra. Thanks so much. And Tiffany, could you tell us a little bit about you and the work of your organization?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And hi, Sandra. Excited to be here with everyone today. My name is Tiffany Shea. As Chris mentioned, I'm a director here at JFF, or Jobs for the Future. We're a 40-year-old national nonprofit. We work at the intersection of education and workforce to push for systems change that will create more economic opportunity for more people. And so as part of that work and in response to, the rise of ChatGPT a couple of years ago, I've been co-leading our Center for AI and the Future of Work, where we're really focused on sense making for the ecosystem to really help understand what is the impact of AI on jobs and skills, what do use cases look like for the ecosystem as a whole, and what are the implications beyond for policy for making sure that we reach our mission to have 75 million people in more quality jobs. So excited to share a little bit about our work and dive into some of the research that we've done, as well as speak to some of those policy implications as Chris alluded to.
That's so great. Thanks. So we'll do this a little bit of a sort of conversational format if we can, and then we have plenty of time for discussion. So I'd invite our colleagues who are listening in to be thinking as we go about how you want to interact and take over for me and ask the questions and bring us through the last 15 or 20 minutes of our time together. We've got plenty of room. So, Sandra, you mentioned accelerating insights. We happen to work together on that a little bit, but for the purposes of today's conversation, I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about what it is, but in the context of how the bank itself has been thinking about some of the same things we're thinking about. How can AI be part of your journey at the bank with respect to your team members and those that you serve as customers?
Okay, so great question. And I'd love to set the stage just very briefly on a few of these things and talk a little bit about our background getting into this. And when we talk about AI, what does it really mean here at Bangor Savings Bank? So I was thrilled to see you were leading this panel, Chris. So our relationship and I think some early journey in sort of the earlier foundational movements in AI started back when RU was launching 2020. So prior to my involvement, and primarily it began with an interest through our IT and our business technology team, with the start of one of the projects being founding partners. So we actually, that journey started quite some time ago. The one I'm going to focus on though today is one that came out of our understanding and prioritizing from a strategic level the importance of learning and education as it relates to data, technology, and tools like AI. And I said it like that because I think it's important, and my role in this project is to ground ourselves with our employees, and I'm sort of leading up to how I'm going to talk about our learning and education with our employees, that the headlines are all about AI these days. But I would also add that the way that we think about it is foundational to getting to AI and what that might mean is also through our employees' interaction and use of data, the openness and excitement around the use of technology, the bank's own infrastructure in technology, and then AI as sort of the next piece in that journey. So once we prioritized that, about 12 months ago, we launched into this new phase of a relationship with the RU, who's helping us over this 2-year period in what we branded Accelerating Insights. And we have 2 objectives with that initiative in Bangor Savings Bank. First is enabling our employees to derive greater value in the work that they do through data fluency and the use of tools like AI. The second objective in this initiative is to create deeper relationships with our customers. And these 2 objectives were really important for us to cement, to decide how we were going to articulate them, because later on when we talk about how is our workforce receiving this, we wanted to set aside any fear that we were going into this because of efficiency or productivity or really some of those things that are the conversation around AI today, but our objectives are different. And therefore, how we approach it and how we're thoughtful about the training and education and the projects need to be aligned with those objectives. So let me talk about just briefly the components of the program. And the big one that I'll circle back around to is our commitment to training our entire workforce. So that's about 1,100 employees over this time frame in different pathways of learning. So as it relates to AI and again, data fluency, because some of the classes are specific to data. So that's one part of this and the biggest one. The second is through what I've sort of been terming as experiential application. So again, in partnership with the RU, we are doing a set of projects that have AI components, but it's experiential because part of this, doing the projects, is not just to get an AI thing or an AI outcome at the end, which is important for sure, but it's also our team learning alongside the doing of these projects so that they're better able in the end to stand them up, to develop them, to do the checks on the models and things like that. So that learning is wrapped within the projects as well. Another component and project that's going on in conjunction, and I put under the Accelerating Insights umbrella, is our approach to responsible AI. It is part and parcel to the rest of these. So is responsible AI and ethical use of these and the use of data and the safety and privacy and protection of data critical to and needs to ride alongside our AI approach? So back to the learning and education piece that we're here to talk about today. Really briefly, as we looked across with Rue, our workforce and the different work that they do, the different development needs and training needs, we divided the workforce roughly, and there's overlap and cross between all of these, but roughly between 5 different pathways. They range from everything up to intensive track around machine learning, where they have a set of learning around predictive analytics, some in-depth coding. I'm going to forget some. But anyway, they have their own set. And then we have a leadership track that's all about what are the trends? What do we need to be thinking about in terms of governance and application of these? To sort of the bulk of our workforce, what do they need to learn to enhance their data fluency skills and the use of the AI tools? To another broad set of employees, from operations to call center to our teller and branch team, where it's again really important that they learn how to use some of the AI tools that are in the industry safely, as well as learn their part in the broader data ecosystem, that they understand that the protection of data, the input, the accuracy of the data is essential to helping us develop a really strong, safe, and sound data ecosystem. So that was a very quick summary. If I missed anything or you want to know more, let me know.
Sandra, I'm going to come back to 2 themes that you introduced in a minute, a little bit later as we lead up to the discussion, but I want to bring Tiffany in. That was fantastic.
Wonderful.
I will just note that I hope you all heard in the end there, I heard great parallels in the range of roles that Sandra just described within the bank's ecosystem, with literally the chart and the types of jobs that span all of Maine that we just learned about from Mark, and the potential for opportunity in each of those. It's one of the reasons I think the Bangor Savings example is so relevant to our charge as a task force to bring the governor some very serious recommendations around these themes. Tiffany, can you pick it up from there? Help us understand the specific work you and the center are leading with the national lens, and what you're learning, as I understand it, through a survey that was done a couple of years ago, as well as sort of brought more current recently, which is really exciting. So you may have some breaking news and themes to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sandra, I loved what you were talking about in terms of what you're thinking about in strategy, because in terms of our national lens, we're really trying to understand kind of where folks are at and some best practices around what it looks like to adopt AI, and to think about what that looks like for different roles, because they may be impacted in different ways, not just from the overall blanket AI potential, but then also if you think about AI potential to replace a task versus augment a task, that looks very different depending on a different role. So all of that to kind of take a targeted look across the organization, as well as give folks time to experiment. We've definitely heard that across different employers on the importance of that, and just having those sort of light bulb moments, if you will, to actually interact with the technology, see what it can do, and then see how it can be applied to work. But then in terms of what we're learning from workers and learners directly, we did conduct a national survey at the end of last year to really understand what are the perceptions around AI, experiences with AI for folks across the country. And so I'll call out a few themes here. So one is that the interest in use of AI is increasing. That's not surprising, right? As the technology came onto the scene, when we did our first survey in 2023, in the summer 2023, 8% of workers were using AI at work. That's up to 35% in our most recent survey. For learners in 2023, 13% were reporting their instructors incorporating AI into their education and training. Now that's 57%, right? So we're seeing a lot more use, which we would expect because folks are starting to use it more, understanding it more. It's obviously part of the national discourse and narrative, so we would expect that. But if you think about those numbers, there are still significant swaths of the population that rarely or never use AI tools, right? So I think we're starting to see a big divide around the users and the non-users, and we need to find ways to bring those non-users kind of along that journey. But for those who are actually using AI, they are really finding value in it. They're finding that it reduces repetitive tasks and makes their jobs more interesting and engaging, allows them to spend time on more kind of human tasks, collaboration, skills like that. So that's theme number one. Second theme is we do also see that the increase in use does seem to be more through individual initiative and effort rather than a systemic push to support workers and learners, right? So when, think about those numbers of adoption, 35%, 57% in education, but only 11% of respondents were actually using AI at their employer's direction versus 20% who said that they were doing it on their own initiative. Same with education and learners, 8% of learners were using AI at their instructor's direction, but 19% were using it at their own initiative. And so that's just really indicative of this trend that we see overall of a BYOAI, if you will, to, be kind of using that maybe outside the parameters or without a really clear policy at the systems level and institutions level. So we see that also kind of on the training side too. We only see about 30% of employers providing training to their workers, at least reported by workers. And overall, workers still don't necessarily feel prepared to use AI in their work. 56% said that they don't feel comfortable with that. So again, just kind of speaks to the need for institutions to step up and help bring folks along and close that gap that we were talking about before. And the last thing that I'll talk about is what folks are feeling in terms of the impact of AI. And I think folks are feeling it already and recognize its potential in the future. So, 57% of workers we found cite that they feel like there's at least some impact or a great impact of AI on their jobs today. And 77% of respondents believe that they believe AI will impact the job they're going to have over the next 3 to 5 years. So the impact that folks are seeing is pretty clear, but I think the disconnect happens when they are trying to think about, well, what do I do about that? What's next in terms of skill development or career change? Because when we asked about, folks making changes, essentially actively pursuing different careers or considering changing their plans in the near future, only 19% said that they were actively doing something about it. And that's probably because things are a little bit unclear at this moment, right? We're all trying to make sense of what's going to happen to jobs and skills. And at the systems level, again, there are not necessarily clear indicators for how an individual can respond and act. And so we need those systems level change. So I think, from things like real-time labor market data, lifelong learning infrastructures, or generally just models for economic security in the light of job changes, those are other types of things that we should be thinking about from a policy lens.
Tiffany, can you I was going to go to policy next. Can we build on that a little bit? And maybe are you, in your view nationally, we've also talked as a group about what some best case examples or exemplars that are happening around the world. Are there one or two policy implications or initiatives that really have your attention as potentially a solution to some of the themes or a lever to really scale opportunity that you're finding in your data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two components to the answer to your question here. One is what do we think needs to happen? And then what are we seeing in terms of early case studies and examples of states that are leaning into this? So in terms of what we're seeing today, and again, knowing that we're all kind of in the early stages of this journey together, there is a lot of momentum. We know there's a lot of bills being passed, 550 AI-related bills we're seeing as of 2025. But there are kind of three areas that we're seeing some early momentum from a policy perspective, but I don't necessarily think that that's capturing everything that we feel needs to happen, at least at JFF, right? So in one area, AI and career navigation is a really natural place that we're starting to see a lot of traction. There are a lot of great tools out there that are really using data to be able to provide personalized guidance at scale. So Colorado is a great example of that with My Colorado Journey, which is a platform that is was developed at the state level in partnership with some private providers, Parent, Bright Hive, and Ligature, to develop an infrastructure essentially for public services to allow workers to be able to find, and navigate career change, benefits, workforce development, training opportunities. So that's one area. The second piece that we often see is going down to the education level, right? That's a really natural place. How do we start getting folks the skills and the understanding of AI as early as possible? So a couple of call outs here. So in Mississippi, we see that they are tying graduation requirements to requiring folks to have a dedicated computer science course, which includes AI instruction, or an industry-aligned CTE course with the embedded computer science. So that is sort of mandating the knowledge and the skill development around AI at a state level. In Illinois, we're seeing that there is the Curriculum Overview and Alignment Act, which requires the State Board of Education to review the mandated units of study. And so that allows a place to be able to kind of bring in topics like AI, digital citizenship, other global trends that we're kind of seeing on a day-to-day basis. And there's also a pending bill in Illinois where higher education institutions are going to have to report to the legislature on their AI education offerings. So that provides another element of transparency to allow for ecosystem collaboration with, say, employers and others to be able to understand how higher education is responding to new workforce demands.
Nice.
And
Tiffany,
then I'll just call, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
I was just going to call out one other kind of tangentially related, but kind of gets at what might be a way to address some of the externalities that we're seeing as it relates to AI. So, something that we're hearing a lot is we're entering a little bit of an arms race when it comes to job applications, right? So AI has made it so easy to be able to create a resume, submit a resume, cover letter, pop that in. And then on the employer side, that means they're getting a huge influx of applications and therefore need to use AI to sift through applications, which is sort of then getting us into a space where how valuable is that resume anymore? And so how can we move to a more skills-based model where we're really understanding what skills have and having, learner employment records, for example. So Alabama is really pioneering the use of LERs through its Talent Triad initiative. So there's a partnership between their state's workforce, higher education, and commerce agencies to really create digital records that capture a person's skills and credentials in, a machine readable format. So that's one place and potential that we can think about from a policy impact. But obviously there are other places like how do you make sure that folks have economic security when they're displaced? How do you bring incentives to bridge education and early career, like incentives for apprenticeships, for example? Those are things that we're, that are not necessarily directly related to AI, but are also other places that policy can lean in.
Especially in the context of what your own data are showing is that so many still feel sort of underutilized or unprepared and yet know that change is coming. So it's a perfect way to kind of bring it back to you, Sandra, and the bank's thank you, Tiffany, and the bank's investment in its people and Mainers, our neighbors. You talked a couple times in your opening remarks about using education. You didn't necessarily say it this way, but education to unlock impact for your team and for your customers. Mm-hmm. Can you just build on that a little bit? And what are you seeing based on the journey you're all on together?
Good question. So I guess I'll take it in maybe a variety of different ways, and if we want to explore any of it further, let me know. So I think one of the interesting things about the learning and education arm of our program is about the commitment to our employees. And there's a number of commitments that we're both explicit about and that we know that we're hoping to achieve through this, or we know we will achieve. So first and foremost, it was really important when we launched our initiative to set aside or maybe to take head on and help our employees set aside the fear of what's in sort of the common speak around AI is, will AI take my job? And one of the things we needed to tackle head on, like as in the way I set out the objectives, but also to explicitly state that we are committed, that we are not reducing our workforce because of AI. That's not happening. In fact, and we both say this and we hope we are demonstrating it, that we think the opposite. The fact that we are much more opportunistic about, in a positive way, we're looking ahead and thinking about the opportunities that come from learning about AI and using AI for our employees and the bank. And I'll give some examples. So first and foremost, I think I'd love to share a little bit about the bank's culture, organizational culture. So our value proposition around You Matter More is about helping our employees, customers, and communities thrive. And we oftentimes order it that way because when we're caring for our employees, they are better enabled to care for our customers and our communities. And so we put that same logic into programs and initiatives like Accelerating Insights, so that are we putting our employees sort of in the center of the building of that program alongside our customers, so that our employees feel proud and excited and cared for. So that's our culture, and therefore that's my approach in this initiative. Then caring for our employees as people in this, as citizens using technology, either personally or professionally, we feel like providing the education around data and technology makes them better and safer users of the technology in the world. So knowing the applications of a BSB GPT or Gemini, or excuse me, Chat GPT or Gemini or one of the others, so that they're better aware and better enabled just in their own lives. It upskills them. We hope they stay with BSB for their careers, but if they choose, elsewhere, then we're upskilling them for their own careers. As employees, they're even better enabled to take on new, different projects, different tasks. This idea, Mark talked to, will AI help speed up or replace some tasks? Well, to us, it's not about productivity only. It's about, can we open up an employee's job to do more complex value add to them, their jobs, spend more time with customers, maybe in the call center, rather than feeling the pressure of moving so fast because they have to do some of those other tasks. So to us, it's sort of a different way of thinking about it. From an organizational standpoint, better preparing our employees around AI and data also makes them better aware from a risk and a safety standpoint when engaging with customers. Are they better able to see things in data that might, say, oh my goodness, we need to look into this, or protect our customers in this way? So they're being more aware is essential as well at all levels of the organization. And then sort of globally as an organization, again, I think it actually allows us to think differently and have more flexibility around how we think about growth in our workforce. What are the needs of our customers, and how can we meet them there? Are the needs of our employees, and how can we meet them there? So I actually think it opens up more opportunity.
Which is, again, Mark, you set the stage so well. All of your themes are living in real life and in the experiences of our panelists, but another really nice connecting back to what we heard to begin. I'm gonna shift my facilitation role to my colleagues on the task force and invite both of you and to receive questions from them. So I'll watch for hand raisings, or people can just jump in. I'll take a look at the chat too.
Questions related to the panelists? I love that point that you brought up, Sandra, and I think that I'll just add to that I think that I wonder if AI is going to precipitate a switch between those people that really have, sort of strict accounting knowledge or strict clerical skills, to people that have a broader opportunity to where it doesn't matter so much what they're accounting for in their information systems, but the fact that they're able to access systems that can work across disciplines and then give them greater ability to cross-train and work in different jobs because they have that ability to utilize AI systems that would enable them to do that for, for license plate distributions or for, chemical warehousing or whatever, depending on how they move through different categories. So that could be an upside of all of this in the job availability and competitiveness area, right?
Yeah, I think so. What you're saying, the way I think I heard that was really making their skills even more transferable in a way, or upskilling them in a way that they're able to apply some of those tasks elsewhere in their learnings elsewhere. That's a really interesting opportunity. And I think Mark might have actually been talking about that too, about maybe
exactly.
that I was going to say widening the gap. It was the opposite, reducing the gap in some of those skills, that I think that's an interesting opportunity.
Jay?
This is Jay Branchick with the City of Auburn, and questions for Sandra. Could you give us, or are you at a point in your project with the Rue Institute that you could give us, more specific example? You had mentioned that, paraphrasing you, but people would be able to do their job better, and it might give them opportunities to do other things, that type of thing. Like, for example, a teller, what's an exact example? Or, do you have any particular jobs, even if it's a back office job or something, that helps flush that out?
Gosh, I think the examples are so many. I mean, when we think of our own jobs in an institution, every team, and maybe I hope I'm not overstating it, but I feel like this is a pretty safe assumption. We have lists of projects and things we've been wanting to get to enhance whatever it is, a process, a service, a product, understanding data better to then continue to provide a product or service differently. I think we have so many things that I know we've been wanting to get to. So if we can, this idea that if we can free up some of that time for our employees and upskill them at the same time, then tackling some of those things. I think in a call center, our own team, so they're extremely passionate about being able to spend time with our customers. I know that sounds obvious, but it's one of those things that I think that if we're able to provide them the tools to be able to document or go through the things that they need to, they can spend that minute or two extra to provide even further advice, to be able to care for those customers. On an operational side, they might be better able to spend time peeling out data to find how can we serve customers better and differently if they're freed up from some of those sort of repetitive tasks. I think of, gosh, I now feel like I'm making things up, but even on our own technology teams, I know they have a variety of things that they want to do to service their partners in the organization better, that I know that if we can provide them the tools to quicker connect tools and resources and data, then they'll better be able to get on some of those really much needed services to their own teams. I know those were general examples, but I think the same model applies anywhere you're in the organization.
Yeah. Sandra, I'll just observe that one of the bank's priorities, as Sandra mentioned, was to make sure that to take the fear out of it, right? To make sure that team members didn't see this as any sort of threat. And one of her colleagues shared with us recently that one of the examples that's starting to manifest is that people now have this common language and common understanding, and it's accelerating the conversations as they get together. They're spending less time trying to understand, what, team member A and group B is saying to team member B and group C, sort of thing. So Commissioner Pingree, you have a question or an observation?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks to all the panelists. I mean, I think you both spoke to this a little bit. Tiffany, you provide some different examples. I mean, this certainly will start to bleed into our education panel, sort of thinking about how do you prepare the workforce, and there's obviously things in the K-12 and higher education system versus how we prepare adult workers already in the workforce. But I'm just wondering, I mean, the task of this task force is what can and should the state be doing from our policy levers. And obviously, we have President Dagler here who, runs a big system, and Maine is represented. But I wonder if you can speak a little bit more towards how we think about supporting the Maine workforce sort of at all levels, and how you think about education. Again, Tiffany, you provided a few specific examples, but any more kind of bigger picture thinking on that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have specific examples to speak to, but from a conceptual and level, we do believe that there is an element of capacity building that needs to happen in the workforce system for any of this to happen, to trickle down to job seekers, right? And so thinking about how do you make sure that folks at workforce boards are skilled up around AI, understand how to use it both internally but also externally, to then design programs that can reach those job seekers in order to reskill them or upskill them around AI. I think that is a really critical piece and kind of foundational for any of the next steps to happen from a reskilling standpoint.
It's really interesting capacity at all levels, to the commissioner's point, early age to beyond. Mark, I just wonder, anything from your perspective that resonates, hearing our guests back to the data that you started us off with? Not to put you on the spot, but why not?
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm definitely interested. Kind of from the education perspective, I could kind of see two ways in which AI becomes kind of integrated into the curriculum. I haven't taken a computer science class recently, but I imagine that when you take a computer science class these days, there will be an increasingly a focus on how do you use AI as part of the process of troubleshooting or generating code or things like that. And you can imagine lots of other ways that it's not necessarily a specific curriculum, but it becomes foundational to the curriculum of so many different fields of study. But on the other hand, are there core competencies that should be integrated into a general curriculum? So whether that's in a high school or a post-secondary based curriculum, I would be very interested to kind of think about what's an approach that is specific to computer science versus what's a core competency that every young person should be learning some of these fundamental principles about AI. And then
Oh, sorry. I was just going to respond to that, Mark, because you bring up such a great point. And I would point to Gwinnett County outside of Atlanta as a great example of a district that has really integrated across the K-12 system in a generalist manner, as you're talking about, and how to use AI, what AI is, et cetera, in an age appropriate manner, kind of across the board.
Mark, you had one more point to make?
I was saying that the other thing that I'm really curious about in terms of how AI tools are being utilized in the Bangor Savings Bank is, I think, top of mind for many of us here within state government, is that the information that we work with is highly sensitive in nature, personal information of Maine citizens and employers, et cetera. And so we always top of mind approach the conversation thinking about protection of sensitive information. So I'm curious about I would be very curious to learn more about the approach that Bangor Savings Bank has to protecting, highly sensitive client information in the context of some of these tools, and how these tools have been developed with safeguards in mind.
Yeah, we have a specific charge as a committee to address this point. So Sandra, briefly, and then we'll come to Senator Libby. Do you want to tackle that? You referenced responsible AI.
Yeah, I think, and I am happy to connect anyone on this workforce in this task force, with the right person and persons. There are many people who are responsible for this. But one of the things, first and foremost, is that financial institutions are already subject to many policies and regulations as it relates to data privacy, security, information security, and others. And I'm giving you the general summary. AI is not separate from those. In fact, it is quite integrated into those. And so that's first and foremost. And again, I can connect to anyone with the right people about how those work together and already apply. Secondly, I think responsible AI is an essential piece of this. And one of the things that we're doing right now is doing an assessment of just that, of really understanding what are the RAI principles that are different from information security, data governance that we already have in place. How do they need to be incrementally augmented to make sure that they're applying to an AI if it is different? It's not always different, I guess is my point. So that's something that we're building a framework and a playbook on to actually right now, and aligning it with our current policies and governance practices within the bank. So anyway, that's the very brief summary, but let me know if you want to be
Last point
connected
is
to the.
super important
Yes.
in parallels to the emergence of the internet, right? Especially in state government. There are so many rules and privacy protections and well-established practices in place that sometimes it's connecting into the decisions that have already been made. But let me go to Senator Libby and bring you into the conversation.
There we go. How are you?
Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
having a little trouble unmuting for some reason. I want to thank Tiffany and Mark and Commissioner Pingree, because I'm going to be serving on the education subcommittee, and I'm already thinking about some of the things that were said about mandates and thinking about how that compares to looking at the Maine learning results and integrating, learning concepts in the Maine learning results. And it seems like it'll give us a tremendous kind of starting point with that subcommittee, just thinking about also how to work in the university system and their expertise, or community college or the privates or what have you. I just am thinking about other opportunities that we've had to look at mandates in other areas, and then looking at learning across all the grade levels by, again, kind of maybe expanding what we have in the Maine learning results. And for me, it's if we're going to think about training, and I know we are, I think there's going to be some integration with the Maine learning results, and the sooner the better. And I'm very interested in getting off to a fast start in Maine, as opposed to watching some other states go with this.
Really well said. Thank you. Well, I'm mindful of time, and we've got some discussion, but before I transition it back, please, everyone, just join me in thanking Tiffany and Sandra and Mark again for their phenomenal perspective today. And with that, back to you, Mary. Our guests, you're all welcome to hang on if you have time.
Yes, please.
Well,
Please.
thank you for your help today.
Great. So we're going to transition to sort of the open discussion part, which everybody's warmed up for. So that's fantastic. So a couple of things for us to think about during this period. What stood out to you most from the speakers that we heard today, and how does it align with your observations of how AI is beginning to shape work and the workplaces in Maine? And do we have the right questions to be assigned to the subgroup focused on this topic? Those are things that we really want you to think about. And to kick off with that, we're gonna start with hearing from. Okay, so your discussion questions too are in Dan Matz's screen in case you haven't seen those. We're going to start off with a few comments from Sam Boss on this topic, and he's going to share some of his insights that'll kick off the rest of the discussion. So Sam, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you to all of the panelists. I really enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot from it, and I really appreciated Mark's presentation too. I appreciate the opportunity to share my own reflections here, and I want to start by sharing a question that's been on my mind, and one that I hope can guide our discussion today and our work in this task force going forward. And that question is simply, what steps can we take on this task force to ensure that AI is actually making workers' lives better. And when I say better, like what do I mean exactly? Better in terms of pay, better in terms of working conditions, in terms of job satisfaction and opportunities for advancement and work-life balance. This is something that I really appreciated with the remarks that Sandra was making and the approach that Bangor Savings has taken. Very glad to be a Bangor Savings customer after hearing that. But often when we hear about the benefits of AI, the focus is on improved efficiency and increased productivity. Just for example, some of the background articles that we read for this session highlighted research quantifying just how much more productive workers were with the help of AI, or how AI leveled the playing field of expertise to allow less trained workers to complete complex tasks more quickly. I can certainly understand the appeal of being able to accomplish more in a day. As a busy person, that's great. It's easy to envision ways that accomplishing tasks more quickly could have benefits for the daily lives of a lot of workers. But a look over the history of technological innovation shows us that we should not take for granted that workers will benefit from increased productivity. From the power loom to the email inbox, new tools that expedite work have often led workers to face pressure to work longer hours in order to meet increasing expectations of productivity from their employers. Improved productivity may yield greater profitability for employers, but that doesn't necessarily translate into better pay, better working conditions, all those things that I talked about as metrics for what actually makes work better for those folks. So workers are understandably wary about the factors that will shape the way that AI is rolled out in their workplaces. The National AFL-CIO found that one of the main concerns among American workers is that tech companies will put profits over the well-being of people in the implementation of artificial intelligence. And that's something, the National AFL-CIO has been monitoring through surveys and qualitative research with union members. So I think one of the roles that this task force can perform and set up Maine to perform going forward is to reassure the public that their well-being is going to be front and center as a consideration as we think about how to move forward with AI. So here are a few suggestions based on some of that work from the National AFL-CIO and some of the work that's happened in other states. So first and foremost, let's proactively center workers' voices as we talk about the ways that AI will be rolled out and regulated in different industries. Whether we're talking about teachers or nurses or paper mill workers, those who are on the front lines of their fields are often the best positioned to know the uses, limitations, and abuses of AI. Centering their voices through improved labor rights or by institutionalizing their voices in research and development can lead to better outcomes, not only for them, but also for companies and for consumers. Another thing that I think is really important is to be very thoughtful about how we permit software or AI that looks at productivity among workers. There's a lot of concern among workers about monitoring systems, surveillance of what they're doing at work all day. And the way that information is used to make decisions about hiring, about promotion, about lots of different things that affect their daily lives, and it can feel very invasive, and that's already something that workers are seeing. And so I think it's really important to be mindful about that. The Berkeley article that went out as part of the background readings for this session talked a lot about policies that other states have implemented to kind of bring that in and set some parameters around the workplace monitoring that can happen. Another thing that I think is important is to require transparency and accountability in AI applications, such as algorithmic management, and just thinking about decisions that are made, whether it's something like patient care. There needs to be transparency about, when AI is used to make a decision, and there needs to be an opportunity for humans to override those decisions by relying on other factors, on a more holistic set of criteria than AI might be using. And finally, I think this is something that I mentioned, I think, in our first meeting, and it's something that is a big concern to me, is for our creative economy, especially. It's really important for us to prioritize protections for copyright and intellectual property. It's really one of those sectors that I think is going to be most affected by AI tools. And so I think we need to be really thinking about how we're going to proactively protect those workers and support them. So those are a few suggestions, but really as we have this discussion and as we move forward, I really want us to be thinking about how do we center that question of how are we actually making workers' lives better, and what tools do we have at our disposal as a task force to do that through policy, through task forces, or through different bodies that we might create going forward. So I thank you for the opportunity to reflect a bit and look forward to the discussion.
Sam, really so well said. And I'm just going to take an opportunity to kind of pile on that a little bit, because I work for an organization where number one thing to employees is really the connection to the mission and the pride and the quality of the work. And that quality aspect has led us to have national reputations around that and really have that be part of literally the DNA in our organization. So I think that's very important. And I want to point this back to Mark, maybe because the productivity discussion is fantastic, but productivity with AI without really well-developed quality control systems, I think they have to be balanced, and people have to see that pride in the quality of what they're putting forward. And how is that really integrated into the models when you think about increased productivity?
Yeah, I think that's a theme that we've heard in several discussions. The kind of the human in the loop aspect of AI and integration of AI into the workforce. I think that's going to be really critical. We talked about that in the context of computer science, that you can't just ask an AI model to write a piece of code that does this, that, and the other with absolutely no knowledge of the data or computer science or anything like that, and expect those results to be valid. The human in the loop aspect of it, I think, is going to be really critical to a successful, accurate rollout of AI in so many different industries. And the approach that we heard about from Bangor Savings Bank, really the people-centered, the worker-centered approach, I think is one that is likely to yield more effective projects, more effective output, more accuracy, and that I think, and I hope it will be a model that many other employers embrace and adopt in terms of putting workers and really the core mission of an organization at the center of any AI efforts.
Others want to jump in or add additional questions? There was a question.
Mary, I was only going to say, I think that just thinking about what Sam brought up, and I think the conversation around, transparency and kind of, I don't want to maybe regulation, but how you make sure that workers understand if they're being monitored. There's some talk about this at the federal level right now. I just would say, I think, to sharpen that question, that last one, risks for the work groups discussion. How could Maine monitor the impacts? I mean, are there policy recommendations? I mean, I think these things are maybe even being discussed before the legislature now, but they certainly will be in the future. It seems like getting a little deeper into number 5 could be helpful.
Great point. Really great point. I'll go back to a question that was in the Q&A that came up during Mark's talk that maybe we can circle back around. It's really about if workers can't keep pace with the technological requirements of jobs that utilize AI, how can they be assisted in their job loss or reinserted into the workforce? What is the plan to sort of help workers keep pace with the technology that's being implemented? And are there going to be opportunities for late stage learning experiences in addition to training the next generation to just think this way, right?
So I might pop in and sort of give that a little bit of additional thought, Mary, but I think it becomes the responsibility of education, and in this case, mostly higher education, to adapt itself to the learning needs of our workforce. So as we're dealing with employed people and who are in the workforce right now and actively engaged, are there ways in which we're working with our workforce partner, our employee partners, our employer partners? I'll get it right once. Are there ways in which we're working with our employer partners to make sure that there is this modulation and consistent upskilling? And I think, as we've heard the presentations, excuse me, both from Mark and from Sandra, we're looking at a gradual progressive change. So it doesn't necessarily represent a cliff as much as it does this continual evolution in the nature of work, and forces us, I think, to reflect on that worker continuous learning cycle.
I think that's a really important comment, and I think in part, that the gradual implementation in part right now is really finding those sets of skills that are going to be used almost universally. Like we know now that if you're in certain jobs, you have to have proficiency with Excel, for instance, because it's so universally adapted. But many of the AI, there's so much newness in all of the AI technologies that it's not really clear yet what enterprise solutions are going to be everywhere. What people really have to hone around to really have that on their resume to land positions and really be to be viable for promotion and so forth. And that's still emerging, I think. And I'm happy to hear others who are closer to these topics, but it's really, I think that's going to be part of the adoption of this and how workers will find themselves qualified in different roles.
Totally
If I
agree.
can jump in here, I think there's a component of that, Mary, which is around durable skills, right? We're seeing more and more. We actually did an analysis of job posting data, for example, from pre-ChatGPT to post, and saw a huge increase in durable skills on job applications or job descriptions, rather. And so, if you think about it, it makes sense. You need the critical thinking, you need the adaptability, you need to lean into more of the human skills like collaboration to be able to succeed in a world where AI takes on more and more skills. And then the other piece that I'd love to expand on, David, is what kind of higher education needs to do to adapt and thinking especially in terms of the impact on the early career. So even if you think about both younger early career folks, but also career pivoters, if we are reskilling folks from jobs that are being displaced, there's a higher bar now in terms of an experience gap because AI can take on so many of those more routine tasks that are typically in earlier career roles. So what does it look like to have more work-based learning opportunities, to have more experiential learning opportunities that really help build that experience in addition to like traditional modes of learning as well?
Great.
What does that look like? It does look like a variety of different things, but mostly making sure that educational institutions within a business's geography are engaging in conversations and then analyzing how work is changing and what skills need to be provided. Then delivering that in models that can be consumed by a working individual. So there is sort of a natural progression. I think that there are a lot of common elements that employers in general would be able to come together on, but we need to really sort of lean in with those partners, the business partners, and be able to understand specifically how they're applying artificial intelligence in the workplace, how that's changing the nature of work, and what are the critical skills that their employees need. Where the interesting convergence comes is that we're seeing that employers are beginning to recognize, as they're more focused on retaining employees, that the employees that they invest in are more likely to stay. And there are a couple reasons for that. It's partially, you hear about the bank saying, well, we're trying to value our employees. You're helping to deliver that value by investing in an employee, but you're also moving an employee who is innately uncomfortable because the job that they knew is changing, and they get they get uncomfortable. And so now they look for new opportunities. So if we merge those two thoughts and say, how can we work with our employers to make sure that their employees are receiving the training, the education, and the elements that they need that match up and link up with how the job, how work is changing in the workplace, we have an opportunity, but it requires that active engagement from the educational institution into the employer. And then it can take a variety of forms. Work and learn opportunities. So you're taking work experiences into the classroom, discussing them, and then moving them back out into the workplace. Call them small A apprenticeships, or various forms in which work and learning are integrated together.
It's great. Maybe I'll pose another question. How do we get it balanced, and what kind of measures or tools can we use to monitor and track how AI is affecting workers? How do we do our own quality study on implementation of these policies and make sure that we can keep track of the concerns that Sam has, and also the concerns that employers have, and concerns on productivity and job flexibility and rehires, all of this kind of stuff? Is there a way to, are there thoughts on how others are doing that? And in the literature that you've read, are there important KPIs or metrics that are really helpful here?
I mean, Mary, I think that those are well said. I mean, I might just even put, well, you put anybody on the spot, but I'm looking at Mark. I mean, he knows the most about how we collect data and how we manage that data. That may not be on the monitoring side, but just thinking about job impacts, job transitions, and where we get sort of job change data, job loss data, and how we might better understand that. I mean, again, Mark said this could be coming. Some people predict it's coming tomorrow. Some people say it's going to take a couple of years or many years, but I'm just wondering, Mark, from the best about how we collect job data in Maine and track it on a regular basis. I mean, do you have suggestions along these lines? And or are there policy changes that we need as a state to honestly understand the data that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit that we can learn from the existing statistical infrastructure. So one example that comes to my mind is that we looked at earlier this afternoon a chart of the kind of the shifting skill demand across different occupational categories. And one trend that stood out is a longstanding decline in demand for workforce in the office and administrative support occupations, and increasing demand in other areas. One of those being specifically the computer and mathematical occupations in recent decades. So we will certainly be able to see, as time goes on, how that shift is playing out in the years ahead. As well, I would be very interested to see. There's kind of that's one aspect that we might see a shift, but another aspect that I heard Tiffany describe is job descriptions themselves are going to be changing. So there's the kind of the category that each job itself is classified into, and we'll see how that shifts over time. But also the individual job descriptions that employers are writing and recruiting for, as time goes on, those job descriptions are going to be changing over time. So a lot of that can be assessed through analysis of job descriptions. What skills are employers hiring for? How is that shifting over time? And are we seeing trends in terms of the job postings themselves and how those are evolving? Certainly within the productivity statistics, we'll be able to tell to what extent, Maine's economy, the size of the amount of goods and services that we produce in the state and the value of those services, will be able to assess the pace at which those productivity increases are playing out. I think one area that we don't necessarily have infrastructure data collection happening now are some of the points that Sam raised in terms of, really getting worker voices more directly involved. Right. So we have a variety of surveys of workers that primarily are intended to assess, labor force status, including whether somebody is unemployed, if they're looking for work, et cetera, to determine the state's unemployment rate. But many of the kind of the deeper questions in terms of how AI is being integrated and the experience of individual workers using those technologies whether they're potentially beneficial in the way that employers are adopting those tools, the potential harms, etc. Probably would be to gather that type of information. We would need additional surveys to try to get to that level of information. And I'll just say that those surveys could certainly be something that could shed a lot of light on the topic. But collecting survey information is a pretty costly and time-intensive endeavor to develop a new survey tool like that.
I wonder, Mary, if we could tie it to, Mark is talking about some of the existing infrastructure and metrics and things that we could make sure we pay really careful attention to with respect to Sam's challenge to all of us. I wonder if we could also think about the answer to the question as we think about the state thinks about implementing the recommendations that emerge from this group, some sort of communications campaign, and use the technology, use social media to kind of daily take the sentiment of the population, right? If we announce the governor's new initiative for A, B, C, and D for Maine, whatever it is that we all, maybe can recommend and she embraces, keeping that alive, and sort of using some of the very tools that have the potential to do the things we're talking about today as a way to kind of keep an ongoing public conversation, with AI, with sentiment, asking the employers to do the same. In our observations working with employers, and I'm sure with many of you, and certainly with the community college system, one group of employees at organization A is going to have a certain expectation and satisfaction, if you will, with workplace learning that might not be calibrated perfectly with the norms, culture, and expectations of a different group of employees with a different group of organizations, or with the membership that Sam and his colleagues serve. And so we could even play around with different comparisons of sentiment across contexts and across groups. It might be something that we think about as a task force to develop a new model for civic engagement, not to get too, extreme about it. But I think Mark's right. It's probably pretty complicated, and the data probably lag pretty intensively if you use the survey instruments. So how do we lean into a future reality where we're taking the pulse of our neighbors and our colleagues every day?
Mm-hmm. No,
And
it's a good.
Just
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to jump in to kind of reemphasize those points by Mark and Chris. I put a link to this in the chat, but Julia Lane, who's a professor at NYU, has some ideas too on how you can both bring in more modern data, from job posting, resumes, et cetera, as well as, other innovative ways within existing systems to be able to have a better real-time sense of what that impact is. So I'm not going to misspeak on all of the specifics around that, but she's also got, she did a podcast episode with Paul Fain on that point, if you haven't listened to that yet as well.
Yeah, and I just opened that article quickly and looked at it. There's a big push to democratize data. And I just want to take off from that point a bit and just say that benchmarks are really valuable to everybody in this space. If we can identify, a way to kind of build these comparators and a way to strive to bring your company or organization to that point where you have a certain amount dedicated to quality compared to the AI that you're implementing, or you have a certain amount of job satisfaction with certain, processes that you're controlling, and have some sharing of benchmarks across the industries to try to preserve somewhat of a broader approach. I think the other valuable thing is when people move from organization to organization, to really be able to look at preparedness if they're moving from one place to another, and how well and how easy it is to integrate into those organizations. Great points. Other questions or thoughts? Been great discussion. Phoenix McLaughlin.
Yeah, thanks. I had a thought or question, I think mostly for Mark, but maybe just for the group, well, the specific question would be, in looking at kind of the analysis in terms of what jobs might be affected, or I forget your phrasing, but the tasks that have kind of the most applicability for AI, is there also are there any sources looking at, what are best, aside from tasks, like what are really reliant on human trust and verification? And I guess what I mean by that is, some of the things at the top of the list were kind of in the fields of finance, legal, things where you really can't screw up at the end of the day. You need a determined result, not a probabilistic result like some of the GPT tools produce. And I guess I'm thinking about that in wondering, there's probably a lot that can be done to kind of speed up the information moving tasks of those jobs. But then you certainly still need the human being kind of guiding the ship. And that's probably true for a lot of these different positions. And to this bigger question of, thinking about the workforce and what this task force can do, I wonder if that could be a layer is considering, preparing workers for, ensuring they have the skills for those kind of very clearly trust-based, human value-based positions, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a question for you, Mark, and also just a general thought for the group.
Yeah, it's a great question. Nothing comes to my mind at the moment in terms of research that really looks at the the stakes of decision making at work. So, to your example, the stakes and the risks, for example, of determining the meaning or interpreting information within a legal profession, like within for an attorney, the stakes of making a decision using information that might be augmented by information gathering using AI. The stakes of that decision making are much higher than, for example, a call center representative, customer service representative that might be helping you with troubleshoot some kind of problem related to your account or the service that you receive, that sort of thing. So I agree. I think that there is quite a distinction between the stakes in certain occupations for sure. I think there is a relationship that in general the responsibilities as responsibilities and stakes of decision making increase, those jobs do tend to be higher paying jobs on average, and kind of lower stakes decision making does tend to be somewhat lower paying on average. And beyond that, I think it also ties into the training aspect of it. Like, what is the core, aspect of what is it that everybody should know about these models? And in terms of, the way that I would integrate these models into work and might talk about them with my team, I would always emphasize the aspect of, the human in the loop reviewing information that has been provided and might be the output of an AI tool. Prompting the AI to tell you specifically, what is the source of this information, or what line within a document did this information come from, right? That human verification, I think, is going to be so important going forward. And it's going to be a core part of the curriculum in terms of learning to use these tools. And as employers are trying to empower their employees to use these tools, the verification of any output that's coming out of these models, I think, is going to be such an important part in terms of effective use and adoption.
And Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Something in that last comment kind of triggered some questions I had from the first presentation as well, which was, if we look at the impact on different wage classifications and job classifications, it strikes me that it's the lower wage jobs that are going to be less impacted, and the higher wage jobs potentially more impacted, which could have a depressing impact. It could be a driver of wage decline in aggregate. And if that's the case, then it strikes me that how we focus on preparing the workforce requires a focus on making those higher wage jobs that are more likely to be impacted higher productivity rather than lower productivity. And where do we find that break point between jobs that will be made less valuable because the value add comes from the AI that they are now using rather than from what the worker is adding to the AI.
Mhm. It's an interesting point. Anybody want to jump on that or jump off that?
Well, I'm just wondering, that's a very big point. Deep, something for deep consideration. I'm wondering if we should just sort of note that. Something to consider from the workforce perspective in terms of the impact and that may through how we make to support and it's a positive.
President Daigle, you broke up there a little bit at the end, at least for me. I don't know if everybody else heard that, but maybe you could just repeat that last sentence for us.
Sorry. Just seeing if once we begin to think deeply about that, if there's a way in which we can then support policy that really moves in a positive direction as opposed to a negative direction, so that we're actually seeing the advancement of AI also advance livelihoods in the form of higher incomes, better workplace satisfaction, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's really important. Yeah, great point. Others want to comment or add to that?
Maybe putting somebody on the spot, which he may not want to have happen. But I'm just wondering, Eric Austin, who helps run the state's UI Bureau, I just wonder if this triggers anything for you or there's anything, again, I'm kind of thinking about the work group and maybe we can show again who's on this work group. We saw that slide. I'm just sort of, this is like our chance to throw out tasks. So Eric, I'm just wondering if there's anything else you think that's important from where you sit. And UI is the unemployed. You tell them what it stands for. I'll screw it up.
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah. So from the unemployment perspective, we don't do a lot of workforce training or preparing for these changes. We're more reactive. We do have an element of what we do that is a reemployment service, and we have reemployment consultants, and we're starting to look at using AI as a tool or training our clients to use AI in order to better prepare them to rewrite their resume, be better prepared to apply for a new job, get back in the workforce. There's even ways to use it to prepare for an interview. You can ask AI to generate some interview questions that might be specifically related to the position that you're applying for, so you can practice ahead of time. So again, we're reactionary, but we're looking at ways to respond in a way that's relative and relevant to utilizing that technology. Now, of course, we've got to train our consultants to be good at that first. So we're just really in the initial stages of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that and maybe come back to some things that Tiffany was saying about the uses of AI and making hiring decisions and helping job seekers, because within these systems there is the potential for bias and for prejudices of various kinds to get into the data. And so I wonder how that's going to affect those types of decisions. And, it gets back to the point I was making about transparency. I would like to know if I'm applying for a job, is it going to be a human that reviews it, or is it going to be an AI system? Does that fundamentally change the way you do an application? I think it very well might. And there are some things that we should be aware of. It really does come down to the data. If you're putting in the data that has bias in it, there's a very good chance that that's going to work against certain types of workers. So I think we have to be conscientious about that. But I'd be curious if Tiffany has seen, has any reflections about that based on what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think we see a few different things, right? I think there are different ways to address what is going to become a reality more and more is that employers will use AI in their recruitment systems. Now, some are doing it more thoughtfully than others. And there are tools and products that try to use AI in a different way. So instead of kind of screening folks out based on your historical data about who you've hired, which inherently has bias, how can you use AI to think differently about identifying overlooked talent and identify folks who may not have been candidates prior, but can use AI to draw relevant skills out, transferable skills out in a way that can then lead to better outcomes. That's kind of ideal state, right? And I think where we are right now is folks are kind of testing out and trying to see and hopefully implementing processes with humans in the loop to be able to know, not using AI to screen out themselves, or like, you know, a TA, a talent acquisition individual has to be in the loop to be able to review what is happening and be able to make changes and have a process in which humans are still reviewing instead of, you know, only relying on AI. So again, we're still early days but these are some of the types of processes that we're seeing employers invoke. And I think a lot of employers are really attuned to this issue and have been hesitant to include AI tools in some of these decision-making processes.
Great. I want to get Dan in before we come to time. Dan?
Yeah, thanks. I obviously I resonate with many of the themes that we've been talking through today. The one that I'll focus on the most, which is relevant for our healthcare environment, is just the challenge that we have in terms of our workforce and shortages therein. And so the recurring theme for us is around efficiency and how these tools can really help our existing workforce be able to meet the need without having us need to go and find additional resources. And this is both in the provision of actual care, but also in all the supporting activities that surround that. And then I also will comment just in terms of our experience already and how we rolled it out, the quality of life, if you will, for our care team members is really augmented quite a bit because these tools, at least thus far, have helped them to just avoid a lot of the drudgery, a lot of the repetitive tasks. And so it's made their work life a little bit more enjoyable. So a little bit of a softer measure, but important all the same.
Super important. Super important. That's great. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. We are at 1:58. I have a few more things to tell you and some thank yous to hand out. This is a really fantastic discussion today. I want to thank all the panelists, speakers, co-hosts, and all the people who contributed to the discussion. Really fantastic discussion across the board. I want to let you know to keep an eye out for an email from your subgroup facilitator inviting you to start those conversations in the coming weeks. And also remind you that our next meeting is Friday, May 9th from 12 to 2. The topic is education. I think couldn't be more fitting to come off of this session. We've teed up so many of those thoughts here today, and I look forward to an equally vibrant discussion. So President Degler, is there anything that you'd like to add in the end?
Good.
I think that was a thumbs up. We can't hear
the second half of the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for a great session.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.